right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Blue Street Data Buyer Workshop. Today's session is on accelerating governance efforts with third-party data when using AI. I'm Kate Gallo, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the community manager here at Blue Street Data, and our team solves the most common problems that data buyers face through products, free resources, and a community of data professionals like yourself. I'm glad you could all join us today to hear from master data management expert and governance expert, Malcolm Hawker. Malcolm, do you want to give a little intro on your background?
Yeah, let me advance the slide. The slides are okay. Wait, hold on. Yay! I know how to use Zoom. Thanks, Kate. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you could make it today. Thank you for carving an hour out of your busy day to join us. My name is Malcolm. As you can see, I'm a former Gartner analyst. I'm a former head of IT. I'm a former chief product officer. I've been a vendor. I've been a consultant. I've been a data leader. I'm currently a data leader. Host of the CDO Matters podcast, you name it. I've been in the data and analytics space for an awfully long time. In that journey, I also worked for a couple of different data providers. So we're going to talk specifically today about third-party data. And I'm deeply immersed in the world of AI these days. Of course, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. When I'm not nerding out on data, I like to take pretty pictures and try to sell them unsuccessfully as NFTs online. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice. Malcolm has one of the longest data resumes I have seen in the data world so far. Thank you for offering up your expertise to all of us today. In the next half hour, we'll be discussing how to accelerate data governance using third-party data, how third-party data will be increasingly leveraged to enable artificial intelligence, some key considerations and common challenges data professionals face, and some recommendations along with Q&A. You're more than welcome to pose questions throughout the whole session. We'll make sure we answer them either throughout the session or in our designated Q&A time at the end of this webinar. So with that, let's get started. I'll hand it off to you, Malcolm.
Fantastic. And thanks again for having me. Let's talk about why third-party data and why we're talking about it being an accelerant for data governance initiatives. I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is that companies are rightfully recognizing that data governance is a key enabling foundation for using artificial intelligence. Data governance is a key enabling foundation for all data and analytics functions. We need to do governance. That's the good news. More and more companies are recognizing this. The bad news is we're having a bit of a tough time with governance. We're having a tough time getting governance initiatives off the ground. We're having a tough time getting business executives aligned to governance and investing in governance. So as important as governance is, it's really hard for companies, especially companies that are just starting on this journey. It's really hard for them to get momentum around data governance. But I also have some more good news here. The good news is that there are data sources out there. There are third-party data sources that can be used to significantly accelerate your governance initiatives. What do I mean by that? Well, a big part of governance is understanding things like data quality. A big thing related to governance is understanding things like data definitions, data structures. I can't tell you how many days of my life I have spent locked in rooms having discussions as a part of early stage governance initiatives where we're talking about how do I define a customer? How do I define a company? How do I define an active customer versus inactive customer, and on and on. But maybe for today's webinar, we'll just use customer as a good example because who doesn't have customers? My point here is that when you are in early stage governance initiatives, you need to make some decisions about things like data quality, data definitions, data standards. And often in those early stage governance initiatives, you struggle to get people engaged. You struggle to reach consensus on some of these key definitions and some of these key policies. But this is where third-party data can drive a ton of value because you can say, hey, maybe we'll invest in some third-party data related to our customers. If we're B2B, maybe we'll go buy some data related to information about companies. Because the companies that are selling you that data do governance for a living. They do data quality for a living. If you are a company making and selling data as a product, you want that data to be high quality. You want it to be consistent. You want it to be accurate. You want it to be trustworthy. So if you are, insert name here, there's thousands of third-party data providers out there. And if you're a provider of data, it's in your best interest to govern the data and to make it high quality and to make it trustworthy. So if you're selling it to a company that is using that in their CRM system or using it in your ERP system, what we're going to talk about today, using it to accelerate AI efforts, chances are pretty good you can trust that data. Chances are pretty good that it's going to give you a pretty solid foundation to work from. Chances are pretty good you're going to be able to use some industry standard definitions related to what's a company, or how do I define something that is accurate or inaccurate. This is going to allow you to accelerate your governance initiatives. It's going to allow you to defend the use of that data. It's pretty easy for you to say, there's two scenarios here. One is you could say, well, I cleaned up that customer record and I did some Google searches for it. And I did my best to try to make sure that that customer record in our CRM system was accurate. Hard to defend that, harder to defend that. Or you could say, well, I used a trusted standard third-party data source that governs the data and applies master data management to it. These are two very, very different scenarios. So this is what I mean by being able to use third-party data to accelerate governance initiatives. So instead of spending days and days and days trying to reach consensus on things that are difficult to reach consensus on for companies that are just starting, you can go and buy data from a third party, or you can license data. You could even maybe get data for free from open sources out there. Although from a trust perspective, I think some of the questions of open source data get a little harder. But you can get access to insights that you would never have had on your own. Right? You would have never had the ability to get the scale that you would have from some of the data you're going to be buying from third parties, right? Trying to develop a database that would have information about every company or every product in the world would be really, really hard to do from the get-go. So these are some of the advantages of using third-party data to accelerate governance initiatives.
Awesome. Those are great insights, Malcolm. So how does this all relate to artificial intelligence, and what should we all know when utilizing third-party data in AI?
Great question. Great question. And, I should start this conversation by saying, this is a very, very rapidly evolving space. It is a rapidly evolving space. Over the last year and a half, 2 years-ish now, that since the AI explosion, the OpenAI has come onto the scene, some of our thoughts have evolved, but at this point, we do know a few things for certain. One of the things that we know for certain is that AI, and particularly generative AI, is both created by and optimized by data. The data that is used to create and optimize these systems, if it is accurate and trustworthy and consistent, you are going to more likely get accurate and trustworthy, consistent results from it. So the data that you were feeding in through maybe a prompt to an LLM, can you trust that data? Can you provide data in what's known as a RAG, retrieval augmented generation process, to help ground the response of an LLM? Can you use data to help make sure that the data you get back is going to be accurate, trustworthy, consistent? What we're seeing is that I would argue a majority of companies are going to operationalize AI at scale through the use of these chatbots and smart agents, right? There's some companies out there that are going to be investing in data science that will have data science teams. These tend to be very, very large companies where you are building your own models, where you are building your own chatbots from scratch, from the ground up. Maybe you're even focused on building an LLM, but probably not. In that scenario, most certainly the quality of data going into those systems is going to be heavily influential in terms of the predictability and the accuracy of the behavior of those systems. But I think for most companies, what it's all going to come down to is using chatbots and smart agents. You'll be in Outlook, you'll be in Power BI, you'll be in any web page, right? Everybody's going to start building these things. You're going to start building these things. You're going to start deploying these things. The initial deployments are going to start internally, and then you're going to start building them for your externally facing applications as well. What we're talking about here is using third-party data as an external fact set, as a known fact set, as a set of facts that you can provide into via complex prompts, feed them into smart agents and chatbots so that the answer you get back is more likely to be accurate. What people are doing these days is again, I mentioned a RAG pattern. Vector databases are another way that this data is being used. But the more trustworthy the data that you can feed into these systems, the more likely you're going to get good answers back, right? And again, The whole idea here is you're buying data from trusted sources, right? If you are working with reputable, trusted sources of third-party data, is it going to be perfect? Of course, it's not going to be perfect. Data is never perfect. It will have some imperfections. It'll have some flaws. But chances are, for most companies out there, the data that these companies are providing is going to be better than what you could probably do on your own. Will we ever fully eliminate hallucinations? No, I don't think so. I don't think we will. So we need to be careful about the use cases that we deploy these smart agent chatbots to support, but using a trusted source of data, using data from third parties that you know are reputable and are focused on data quality and are focused on data governance is going to help you get a leg up when it comes to start deploying some of these smart agents and chatbots across your organization. I do see some interesting opportunities here, maybe for the ability to kind of start pooling data, where small companies could maybe start pooling their data together. I think that even third-party data providers could start doing this as well. But really what I see in the future maybe is that smaller companies start to get to act a little bit like bigger companies, right? Where if you are getting data from multiple providers, if you're working with some of these third-party providers, again, they could give you access to data that you would never be able to create on your own. They could give you scale that you would struggle to develop on your own, where you could take that data and help either create AI-based systems from scratch, which I think most companies will not do, or more likely, they will use that data to help influence the behavior of these smart agents that you're going to be widely deploying across your organization.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's great to keep in mind that the data is never going to be perfect when you get it.
No.
There's many methods to augment it and improve it. Yeah. So using third-party data for enabling artificial intelligence is a big topic right now, as you said, and something many data professionals deal with. So what challenges are you seeing data professionals facing in your experience and your conversations when it comes to data governance, third-party data, and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, there are, right? So there are most certainly some things to be aware of here when it comes to using third-party data. Now, whether that is for an internal governance initiative, whether that is for an AI-based initiative, there's some things here that are fairly kind of universal when it comes to the challenges related to acquiring third-party data. The first one to think about here is that when you are dealing with these businesses that are selling you data. Now, again, there are third-party data sources dealing with very big companies listed among some of them you've heard of, like a Moody's or a Dun & Bradstreet or an Experian or an Epsilon or Axiom is very, very long of the companies that sell data for a living. But if you're dealing with one, keep in mind that they are trying to have a mass market appeal. Okay. So if you are selling data, it's impossible as a data vendor to have a completely and totally bespoke solution for any one company. What you probably will do, data providers do, is that they have vertical or functionally specific data sets, right? So in the case of some of the bigger providers, they'll say, well, here's the data that we sell for a marketing use case, right? And here's the data that we sell for a supply chain use case. Some of the data may be common across those use cases, but how it's presented may be different. Maybe some of the standards are different. Maybe some of the definitions are different. But at best, as a buyer of that data, what you are going to get is a data set that is specific maybe to your function or to your vertical. Maybe you're in oil and gas, right? Maybe somebody's selling you a data set that is specific to oil and gas companies, that has a lexicon, definitions, labels that look familiar to you. But when they are selling this data kind of in a mass market, right, they have to appeal to a broad array of the market, which means that the rules that they use, okay, for governance, for things like matching, deduplication, the rules they use for quality, when is something accurate versus when is it inaccurate? Those rules are being built to best align to a very, very wide swath of the market. And those rules may not always fully align to the rules that you have in your organization. I'll give you an example. You could buy a set of data related to like leads, for example. That's a very common lead. You can just go buy a list of email addresses out there if you wanted to go mass market to somebody. You could go buy that and you could load it into a CRM system, and salespeople could see that and say, okay, well, that data is incorrect. Or you could buy business information and load it into a CRM if you're more B2B. And you could say, oh, well, I think that data is incorrect, right? Because the salesperson will say, well, that's not who we sell to. We sell to this other division, right? Or we sell to this other franchisee, or on and on. And maybe the data isn't actually incorrect. It's just the way that your organization looks at that data tends to be a little different than how the third party would look at the data, or the governance policies that are widely accepted within your organization are slightly different than the governance policies used by that third party data provider to create it in the first place. So is there going to be a one-to-one fit between what the data provider is doing and what you are doing internally? No. What we're really going here, folks, is 80-20. Can you get to a point where 80% of your requirements can be fulfilled by that data provider? That's really kind of what we're going for here. Is we're not trying for perfection. Can you get close? Because there's still going to be benefit here, because you're going to accelerate all of those other governance initiatives that I was talking about before. So just beware. You're generally talking about one size fits all, and chances are pretty good that some of your users may complain and say, okay, well, this isn't right, or this is incorrect. It may be incorrect. There may be situations where the data is just wrong, but chances are more likely that the way that the provider looks at the data, the way the governance standards they've applied to it, are slightly different than what you normally see in your organization. Keep in mind, there will be license constraints here, right? Most data providers don't want you to go and replicate that data a million times, right? Most data providers are going to sell you data specific to a use case, right? You'll say, hey, I need this data to support marketing. And they'll say, hey, that's fantastic. Here you go. And we got APIs, and you can load it into your CRM system and you're good to go. But you can't, in most situations with most providers, your license agreement is going to preclude you from copying that data and loading it into your ERP or your procurement system or your digital marketing system or whatever, right? So be wary of license constraints. Data providers are very, very diligent about monitoring this, and just keep that in mind. Something to keep in mind is that the governance maturity levels in your organization may differ than the governance maturity used to create the data. This is something I touched on in the first point there. Cost versus benefit. Boy, this is a big one. Some of these data providers charge a lot of money. They charge a lot of money for these products. Something that certainly that my friends at Blue Street are helping to address and helping to provide a little bit more transparency around in the marketplace about what you're paying out there. But a lot of these companies charge a decent chunk. So do you, or are you in a position of being able to say, yes, I can justify an investment in a third-party data set because it's driving ROI within my organization? A lot of us, folks, struggle with quantifying the business benefit of any data, whether that data is generated and managed internally by us or whether it's bought from somebody else, like a third party. So keep in mind here, often what you will see with a lot of these data providers is probably going to provoke some sticker shock. Because it certainly provoked sticker shock with me. It's like, oh my gosh, it costs that much? What? But when you kind of factor in everything, of course, there's no one answer here, but when you factor in a lot of the things that I was saying, like the acceleration of governance efforts, right? The acceleration of data quality efforts, right? Because these vendors are doing data quality on this data. That means you probably don't have to do it. You don't have to steward data that is coming from a third-party provider. Knock, knock, right? So keep in mind the data may be expensive, and it probably is, but what else are you getting, right? You're getting governance kind of in a box, right? You're getting data quality in a box. You're getting data stewardship in a box, because most of these providers will sell you updates to the data. So you are getting things here that are a little bit more intangible that you're probably going to want to take into consideration in the overall ROI in your investment in this data. Do be wary of the quality coming from third-party providers. I'm generally bullish on the quality, generally, because again, if your business is building and selling data sets, you're going to want to make it as high quality as possible. You can't be out in the market selling data if everybody is saying the data sucks. So, but you do need to be wary of it. So just because you are buying data to help accelerate, and I would argue kind of initiate more of a quality of as a service type model, right? Where you're deferring to a third party to manage quality for you. That doesn't mean it totally negates the ability for you to keep your eye on it as well. right? Certainly something to keep in mind. And the transparency of third-party kind of supply chains. Again, this is something that Blue Street is working on. I think there's a massive opportunity here to drive more transparency in the market related to data. With a lot of these bigger providers of third-party data, there is a lot of sharing, right? There is a lot of reselling that happens in the background. I happen to know this for a fact. There is a lot of reselling and sharing of data, right? Where you're buying from one provider and you think that you are buying from one provider when lo and behold, that data is actually originated from another provider. It's going to be really difficult in the market to understand that. It's going to be difficult for you to see that. Ultimately, this comes down to price, because if you can get that data, the exact same data set, cheaper from somewhere else, that's exactly where you should go. But knowing and having the transparency that that data actually was resold from vendor A to vendor B, and it's the exact same data, this is something that Blue Street Data is focused on. And I'm really, really excited about, because I know for a fact there's a lot of sharing that goes on between these providers.
Yeah, we're very excited about it too. Quality of data and really understanding data lineage and the transparency around that, where it comes from, are two of the core missions that data buyers face that we solve at Blue Street Data. And this fall, our product team is launching a search tool for data sets that allows you to see the score of data sets based on their quality. So you can shop for data sets, knowing everything that suppliers know, so you can see the quality behind that actual data set when you're going to purchase. So anyone interested in that, there'll be signups for getting a first glimpse of that product at the end of this webinar. So Malcolm, given that there are lots of challenges that data buyers face, what are your top recommendations for data professionals to keep in mind when approaching this?
Great question. As always, think big, but start small, right? Do not try to bite off more than you can chew. Be very, very, very outcome driven. Why are you focused on AI? Why are you talking about AI? What problem do you think you are going to solve with AI? Can you carve a very, very, very limited number of use cases, or maybe just a single use case, where you could do some early stage piloting of AI deployments in your organization, right? Can you solve one specific problem? I'll give you an example. And this one aligns to more of an internal use and an internal deployment of an AI-based chatbot. And I happen to love it. Could you use AI to create like an HR chatbot internally, right? Could you have somebody be your digital HR assistant, where what you are feeding into that chatbot is very, very, very specific? Maybe you're loading some third-party data related to company holidays or federal holidays around the globe, for example, and you're asking an HR agent, "Hey, tell me when the upcoming holidays are," right? Like, that's a very, very, very specific use case, and it's limited, right? But could you start small here? Could you find a way to maybe have some chatbot that is focused more on reference data, right? Where you're asking questions about reference data or reference standards, you name it, but think very, very big, longer term, but start really, really small. Be limited number of use cases, but focused on a specific business outcome. Have a bias to action. Be agile. Test and learn. Do not focus unnecessarily on trying to say, okay, well, all right, governance is a dependency, so I need to figure out all governance. No, you don't need to figure out all governance. You need to figure out the governance needed to support a very limited number of use cases. So again, start small, be agile, iterate. Do not look at these problems as this giant, hey, I need to implement a data science team, hire 200 data scientists and implement a data governance framework, and I've got all these giant lifts that I need to do. That's a ton of work. Again, I talked about internal use cases. Perfection is impossible. It just really is. Near perfection is cost prohibitive. What you start to see when it comes to data quality is that, the cost to go from 65% quality to 66% quality is infinitely smaller than it is to go from 95 to 96, right? Things start to get exponential quickly when you're talking about data quality. So avoid the temptation to think of data quality as this deterministic, it is or it isn't. There's always a sliding scale. What is quality to people in marketing is different than what is quality to people in finance. So find a use case you can focus on where you are maybe going out and getting some third party data. Maybe you're going to take that data and feed it into an internally facing chatbot. Have that chatbot be very focused on a specific problem, but stay small and keep in mind that perfection is never going to be possible. And if you try, you will spend way, way, way more money than you could have ever have imagined when it comes to data quality. So I think we're getting close to the end, Kate. Do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we've got time for Q&A. I see a couple in the chat, so feel free to go ahead and submit any questions you have while we're answering them. But yeah, Malcolm, you want to kick it off with some of the questions?
Yeah, what we got? Let's take a look. Is there a difference between the use of third-party data to support data governance and data governance to support third-party data? Yes. Yes, yes. You can use AI two ways. You can deploy it externally as a part of your product, right? To improve your business processes, to improve your workflows, to improve your products. And you could certainly be deploying AI to better manage your data, including third-party data. Most of the conversation today was focused on the former and less so the latter. Now, certainly, both use cases are valid. I've focused more on the former today because, frankly, what your business wants right now from AI is sizzle, right? And yes, there's going to be a lot of value when it comes to automating internal processes, automating data governance, automating data management, using third-party data to help fuel the AI-based systems that will do the automation. But honestly, cost savings is a far less compelling business case than revenue generation. And I think ultimately revenue generation, where you are doing the externally facing AI-based stuff, is probably more where your board is thinking when they're talking about, or your senior executives are talking about when it comes to AI enablement. So there is a difference. Both are valid. But if I had to pick one to be working on, I'd be focused on the one that is revenue generating and not cost savings. Second question, how can my team ensure the ethical use of third-party data considering potential bias or fairness? Oh my gosh. Pass. I'm kidding, of course, but I can't answer that question in 2 minutes. When it comes to bias and ethics, that's probably a separate webinar in and of itself. These systems are inherently biased because they're created by humans, and we are inherently biased. So, when it comes down to ethical behavior, the biggest challenge I see in the short term, the biggest challenge is not the technology, because in the short term, it'll do exactly what we tell it to do, and we can override the technology. We can implement whatever rules that we want. The challenge is quantifying these things. The challenge is quantifying them. How do we know, and building the rules to define what is ethical and what is unethical? Right? These are the bigger challenges that I think that we need to be talking about at a societal level. I'm not trying to skirt the question, because this is a really, really big thing we absolutely positively need to be focused on, and I cannot answer in 1 minute, and goes well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but all things that we need to be talking about. Lastly, how important do you think transparency is in third-party data goes into AI models? If we're creating AI models, how can we be transparent as possible with our users and customers? Hey, great question. I think we can be transparent by publishing them. Now, that's a real problem, because for companies today, that's a competitive advantage. But what you're seeing is that even in a very, very short period of time, especially when it comes to some of these large language models, we've got to the point of rapid commoditization, where the difference between solution 1 and solution 2 is marginal. So I think these systems and these solutions tend towards commoditization, right? Where the differentiation between these systems is just so marginal that if I'm building a business around this, maybe I start from day one going open source, right? And being transparent. As a consumer, I can make a choice. Do I use a product that is open source, that is transparent, that tells me how it works, that tells me what the rules are? Or as a consumer, do I pick the thing over here that I have no idea how it works or why it does what it does? So I think there's two ends of the coin here. I think from a business perspective, I think over time, increasingly, The value will not necessarily be in the models, but in the use cases that the models support and the outcomes that the models are driving. So I think that there, in the longer term, there will be a motivation for companies to be more open about how these things work. In the short term, as consumers, what we can demand is the transparency by only using open source models. So that's a short answer to a longer, very complex question again. So maybe another webinar in and of itself. I know we're getting towards the bottom of the hour here, but if there's anything else we want to touch on, Kate, let me know.
Yes, speaking of other webinars, in terms of what resources attendees will get after this webinar, you'll have access to signups for our next webinars and workshops in our Data Buyer series. So on the next slide here, you'll see a list of what you'll get via email after this webinar. And our team at Blue Street Data is also developing a first of its kind comprehensive data buyer's guide that provides insights, tangible solutions, and then step-by-step instructions for any step of the data buyer's journey. So no matter what stage you're in, you'll find actionable insights in that free resource guide. Access to that guide, as well as early access to our new product that allows you to search for data sets and see a quality score comparison, will also be included in your inbox after this. And then for any more questions on the next slide here, we have the contact information for our Blue Street Data team, as well as Malcolm Hawker. So thank you all for joining us today to learn about data governance, third-party data, and AI. And a huge thank you to Malcolm Hawker, one of our favorite data people, for lending us his time and expertise.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Come find me on LinkedIn. I look forward to doing this again sometime really soon. Thank you so much, Kate and Blue Street Data.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.